This is Dateline News and Conversation. My guest tonight is a Canadian. He's a professional journalist. He's a broadcaster. He's been on the show before. The topic tonight is going to be Zelensky in Canada, the scandal that resulted from honoring a Nazi Waffen-SS veteran in the parliament when Zelensky was going to deliver a speech. I want to talk about what is his view on Zelensky coming up empty, but after visiting the United States, getting no money, going to Canada, Spain, and now several countries in the EU are kind of balking at giving him more money and weapons. Is this causing a stir? Is it causing panic in Kiev? I'd like to know from his point of view. And then there's an incredible story, front page on RT just this afternoon, about a queen of Canada, Romana Didulo, who is threatening a small village in Saskatchewan. My guest tonight, returning, Rick Walker. Rick, welcome back to the show.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you, Regis, for having me back.
Well, you know, having somebody with your pedigree and your background from Canada to comment on the happenings of the last week is very important. So let's start with the first thing. I mean, this has gotten worldwide attention. Zelensky went to Canada after the United States, and he gave a speech. And I don't know whether it was before the speech or after the speech, but the head of the parliament, the speaker, introduced Yaroslav Hunka, a former Waffen-SS veteran that basically got the attention of the world and has ended up being perceived as a scandal. Rick, give us a little background on this and what was this all about?
So Zelensky comes to Canada with cup in hand, looking for more money. He actually gave a number of speeches, met with the Governor General, who is the King's representative in Canada, gave news conferences, then addressed Parliament. He was welcomed with open arms. It was very ceremonial. There were many dignitaries there, and one of the people in the audience was Yaroslav Hunka, who had served as a Ukrainian with this Waffen-SS division, and he was now 98 years old. He was one of many Ukrainians who came to Canada after World War II, and they honored him in the House of Commons. How this happened, still not entirely clear. We do know that the House Speaker is the one who has accepted responsibility for it. The House Speaker is from North Bay, Ontario. Mr. Hunka, also from North Bay, Ontario, and decided to invite this guy to Parliament to receive this honor as part of Zelensky visiting. Presented to Parliament and the public at this event as a war hero for Ukraine, having fought against Russia, and also a hero of Canada, which was kind of bizarre, to say the least. And as a result of, as this thing kind of unfolds and this ceremony is going on in Parliament, and the Speaker then turns and recognizes him in the audience, everyone stands up and applauds and gives him standing ovation. All 338 members of Parliament, the dignitaries, everyone there, every single person in the place. So, of course, that has resulted in extreme controversy because it's clear that either people were not aware, did not know their history, which they should, or they were endorsing or truly applauding a Nazi knowingly. Where people stand on that, I have, sort of my own views on the level of guilt here. But certainly the buck has to stop with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who did issue an apology on behalf of the country, but still to this date, in my view, because of the words he has chosen, has not actually accepted any personal responsibility for this whatsoever. And it never should have happened, because this person should have been vetted prior to, and they should have known, and the Prime Minister met him beforehand, along, with other officials, even on the side of security. This guy should never have been in there. It's a little bit complicated, a little bit more. The depth of this goes much further than I think even the media is portraying it. But yeah, it has set off an international storm, and no question, it's. Are we still there, Regis? Are you still with me?
Yeah, I'm still with you.
Okay. So yeah, it's a big problem on the PR front for Canada, and it's a huge embarrassment for me personally. It's been extremely painful to have to watch this happen because obviously it's an absolute disgrace.
Well, a lot of people have commented on Trudeau's weak or no apology, really. I don't know whether you know this individual. He's become a good friend of mine, Dimitri Lascaris. Was born in Montreal, got a law degree from Canada, big-time lawyer. He's now retired at a very young age. He's a blogger, an activist, and he's traveled across Canada trying to advocate for peace with Russia and to try to inform the people of Canada about what really is happening in Ukraine. Mm-hmm. But he was extremely harsh on Justin Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland. In fact, he called for Trudeau to resign.
As I already have too, yes.
And to get rid of Chrystia Freeland. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I'm misspeaking here, but very pro-Nazi. Her grandfather was a Nazi. She spent time in Ukraine. She's very anti-Russian. So what's been the reaction in Canada towards Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland? In my opinion, and I agree with you, somebody should have known. Somebody who is an advisor to Trudeau, Chrystia Freeland, of all people, probably should have known. What's your take on this?
Yeah, they should have known. I think that some people did know. Clearly they did. Trudeau, if he didn't know, he should have known, because his office is directly responsible for these kinds of events. He has the resources in place to prevent this kind of thing from happening. But it's more than that. It isn't just about having this person honored in Parliament. It's the issue, really, the larger issue is why wasn't this sort of dealt with beforehand? If this person hadn't been presented in Parliament, would anything have been done about it? And the answer to that is really no. So have we dealt with the issue of Nazism from the past adequately in Canada? And I'm not sure. I can only say that I am hoping for peace. This is honestly such a huge scandal. It is so disheartening that it really, in many respects, may contribute to having this country torn apart. And I'm very concerned about that. Canada already is not as stable as people believe it to be as a Western country, because of a long history of separatist movements, of the fact that it is a very diverse, multicultural society. There are a lot of stresses being placed on Canada right now, and it will, I think, honestly, this country will be very lucky to survive in its current state. I see many paths to this country being split up, broken up down the road, and maybe in not very distant future.
You know, I think it would be unfair, unjust for anybody to paint Canada with this brush of being favorable to Nazis. There's a history of Ukrainians and Ukrainian Nazis coming to Canada. Mm-hmm. But I'm going to be the first person to point out that the United States, after World War II, in Operation Paperclip, bought over 1,000 Nazis, including Werner von Braun, mm-hmm. the hero of the United States missile technology and space exploration. And the United States placed many of these Nazis in key positions in the United States government.
Many countries did after World War II. And to understand what's really going on here today, and with even this incident in Parliament in Canada, you really need to understand the history behind a lot of this. Canada was basically forced by the United States to take a lot of Ukrainians and Ukrainian Nazis after World War II, just because of the way their laws were set up at the time. And, the CIA basically told Canada that a lot of these guys, they needed them to come to Canada. So I think we had somewhere around, it was thousands after World War II. Actual Nazis, I made some notes here, like how many after World War II? About anywhere between 2,000 and 5,000, probably in that range. But that was right after World War II and right up into the 1950s. Canada has the largest diaspora Ukrainian community in the world outside of Ukraine. It's the biggest Ukrainian population. Most of it is out in Western Canada, a lot of it in Alberta, far away from where I live. There are some Ukrainian communities here in Ontario, not so much right where I live, but some down in the Windsor area, right on the Windsor-Detroit border. And there were many, many other Ukrainians, tens of thousands, who moved to Canada after World War II who did not serve in the military. So we have a big Ukrainian community out there. It gets complicated. And after World War II, the Canadian government looked at all of this, as did other Western countries, and they made a decision. Yes, we will accept these people into the country. We will give them all security checks. Their military service notwithstanding, as long as they pass these checks that we put in place before allowing them to come into the country. Long before I was ever born, and long before a lot of Canadians ever arrived in this country, given the level of immigration that we have here. So it's Regis, it just raises this question. What do you do with all the soldiers on the losing side of a war at the end of the war? Do you line them all up and shoot them? Do you execute them, imprison them all, the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands? Like, what do you do with them all? And what we saw the United States, the Western countries, and frankly, even Russia, at the end of World War II, they looked and they found the best and the brightest, or maybe not the best, maybe the most evil, but the brightest, the smartest scientists, and they fought to get them to come into their countries. All the different countries, Britain, United States, Canada, and even Russia. I think Russia took in somewhere around 2,500 scientists as well. Now, I don't think they treated them with the open arms that the West did. In some cases, they were taken at gunpoint and forced to work, okay, to reveal their scientific secrets, because the Nazis had all kinds of very advanced technology, especially rocketry technology, and those scientists also helped the Russian space program. So nobody is squeaky clean on this. Nobody in the world. And that's the absolute truth. What we've done with these people afterward, it's maybe nothing to be proud of, but I'll tell you this. I'll ask you this personally, Regis. Yaroslav Hunka, 98 years old. I don't know what he may or may not have done in that war. There is apparently a diary out there that has been made public somehow. Whether it's authentic or not, I do not know. But this is a guy who was told a long time ago that after his military service in Ukraine, not Germany, in Ukraine, they were under German command, and I guess they were some sort of an elite squad, but he was told that he could come here, and he was put under a microscope. In addition to that, there was a commission that was formed in the 1980s in Canada called the Duchesne Commission. And it was formed under pressure from the Jewish community here and people who have a lot of concerns about World War II history and Nazis that came to the West afterward. So the Duchesne Commission looked at all of this, and they had about 880 different cases that were brought to their attention. They investigated all of these things. In the end, of few were actually identified as cases that they tried to bring to trial. There were no actual convictions at the end of it. But through that entire process, some were extradited, some were deported, and Canada has revoked citizenship for some people who were questionable. So actions were taken on that side as well. But the Duchesne Commission also has a lot of documents that were never released to the public. And it was very controversial at the time. I was young. I was just getting into journalism in those days. I didn't cover that stuff directly, but I have covered an actual war crimes trial here in Canada. Not involving a German, but he was Yugoslavian and was a Nazi soldier under German command and probably did commit atrocities. He's long gone. I covered that in the 1990s, but he was so frail he could barely walk. And at the end of the process, they decided that he wasn't fit to stand trial because he was so sick. So they're literally carrying him into court day after day. And then the stress got to him, and he got very sick and died very shortly after they said that he wasn't fit to stand trial. I don't think the guy even knew what the hell was going on when they were dragging him into court. So you could say justice delayed, justice denied, whatever. I understand that. But this gets very, very complicated. And my position on this is anybody that is accused of a crime is entitled to due process. So put him on trial if you want to put him on trial. If you want to lay charges. That's all cool with me. But you have to have due process. There can't be a mob mentality here. And this guy has been scrutinized in the past. And the Duchesne Commission also came up with this conclusion in the 1980s, that even that division, there was never definitive proof, according to the Duchesne Commission, which may or may not be true, but that they said that there was never definitive evidence to support war crimes allegations like the ones that we're looking at right now, and that every soldier, everyone involved, was entitled to due process. So they did look at this stuff a long time ago. Now, some people say it's a whitewash, was a whitewash. I understand that. But here we are again. It's 2023. The problem here right now is, there's a Nazi in Parliament. And I'm kind of like, yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. I don't know why the Parliament didn't know. I have thoughts on that, but, it's like they should have known better. There he is. This is not new. This is just bubbled to the surface again. And it's been honestly, how many of these guys are still around? 5? 3? He's 98. It's been 78 years since the end of the Second World War. He was a fighting age at the time. Vast majority of these guys are dead. But what's happened as a result of this, and I think it's unfair to Canada, and largely because of, what it's like here. We don't have people in jackboots marching down the street with swastikas on their arms out in public and, doing Heil Hitler salute. That's not what this country is at all. In fact, the country is outraged over this. Anybody you talk to on the street is outraged. So, but what's happened in the court of international public opinion is that now Canada is like the second coming of Nazi Germany because of this one guy in Parliament, which is, for me, I'm sick to my stomach every day I wake up, and I'm embarrassed by it. I'm sickened by it. It's wrong. No, regardless of what he may or may not have done, just the fact that he served on the German side says that you don't honor that. You just don't do that. But there they did. And that's wrong. But so, too, is it wrong to paint the whole country and all the people in it as a bunch of Nazis. We're not. And that also falls at the feet of the Prime Minister, It was his responsibility to step up, accept responsibility for this on behalf of the Canadian people, because it was his damn fault. But he hasn't done that. He's thrown the entire country under the bus, and he's apologized on behalf of the country when it wasn't the country's fault to begin with. It was his fault. And it was, the fault of previous governments for taking the actions or inactions that they took. Because most Canadians are not even aware that this stuff took place. It was all very low key. Canadians, for the most part, were not aware that even these Nazis were brought into Canada. There's documented records of it, but the government took it. And why did we take them? Because the United States told us they wanted us to. They sort of forced us to. And we're a small country. We don't have the power that the United States has. They're a superpower. We just happen to live next door. And when they say jump, we say how high. That's the reality of our government. Any small country living next door to a superpower, that's the reality. You have to not just go along to get along. You just have to do as you're told a lot of the time in order to make sure that your sovereignty is to some degree protected. Do you understand kind of where I'm coming from?
Yeah, and I agree with you on every point that you made. I lived in Canada. I went to school there for 4 years. And I think it's horrible to paint the whole country, all Canadians, with this Nazi brush. It's the same situation in the United States. Most American people are not aware of Operation Paperclip. Mm-hmm. They're not aware of their history. They're not aware of how infiltrated their government has been for the last 78 years. Mm-hmm. And I will talk about the United States of America. I think it has become a fascist country. They refuse, even at the UN, to denounce Nazism. They refused. I mean, this blows my... there were only a few other countries that were also on board, but they were under America's heel. And so I'm extremely critical of the Dulles brothers. Who are the ones who orchestrated all of these Nazis to leave Germany and come to Canada, the United States, and other countries. Mm-hmm. I know that history. And I think it's repulsive. And I think in these last 78 years, the United States government has increasingly become a fascist country, denying our basic rights in the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. I mean, it angers me tremendously at what has happened. And if anything, I'm angry that the people in the United States are not able to wake up and see this. And I would suggest that probably the same case in Canada.
It is the same here in Canada. Justin Trudeau and his liberal regime is just that. It's a regime because he, right after being elected, described Canada as the world's first post-national state. He says that Canada has no actual cultural identity. Because why? He's a globalist. He is the poster boy for the World Economic Forum and these globalist, all the globalist entities, right? These organizations that advocate for a one world government. He truly is. And that's also why Canada isn't in play right now. I believe that there is a war being waged. It's being waged right in Canada right now. And because Canada's government has been captured, essentially, by the globalists. And that is right now the Liberal government. But the people of Canada, they didn't vote for any of that. None of that was ever discussed during any political campaign. The Canadian people were presented with a candidate and candidates through the Liberal Party as a bunch of, liberals, neoliberals with socialist ideals. People here voted, frankly, for free stuff. They voted for free health care. They were voted for this utopian, neoliberal socialist idea that has been presented to them. And in reality, what we got is a neo-fascistic or neo-communo-fascistic authoritarian in charge who is really, as I said, the poster boy for the globalists. And he's selling the country out. He's saying, here it is, here's Canada. and the United States, it's all yours, and we've signed on to all of these Agenda 2030, all these sustainable development goals, all of these globalist ideas that really give up our sovereignty as a nation and hand it over to unelected, I'll call them bureaucrats or whatever, but elites, if you want to call them that Canadians really have no ties to, no control over whatsoever. And it's exactly the same thing in the United States, where Biden and the Democrats have buy into this as well. And they go off to Davos every year and they form basically their goals for all of the West. This is NATO too. I mean, this is the reality of NATO today. It's the WEF, it's NATO, it's the World Health Organization, it's all these global organizations that come together and form policy platforms, political goals, and it's all coordinated. That's why today, even especially during the pandemic, when you're listening to all these politicians talk on television or online, the campaign slogans are all the same. It's consistent messaging from country to country to country to country to country. It's because they're all working together, because we are living on, everything's been captured by this global organization of one world governance. So we have regional governments, but at the very top now, it's this unelected global government that's controlling everything, and it's very authoritarian. I don't think these old labels of communism and fascism or Nazism even quite apply today, because what I see that being is sort of a hybrid thing, and it's a little bit murky as to what the actual ideology is behind it, but it's definitely authoritarian. It's absolutely not democratic.
I'm glad you brought that up, because Vladimir Putin, I just on last Thursday at the Valdai Discussion Club in St. Petersburg, gave an incredible speech. And after the speech, he spent some 3 hours or more, as he always does, answering direct questions from the audience. He didn't duck any. He didn't have a teleprompter. He didn't have an attorney sitting next to him. It was right off the cuff. But I want your thoughts on this. You mentioned these globalists.
Yep.
Klaus Schwab, the big daddy, the big kahuna of the World Economic Forum, in pursuit of world domination. You will have nothing and you will be happy, and you will eat
nothing and you will be very happy. Yep.
Vladimir Putin, in his speech, and I've not heard a lot of people talk about this yet. Mm-hmm. He, who had been a friend of Schwab and a participant at several World Economic Forums, in his speech, if you looked at it, was a direct challenge and rejection of everything the globalists have been putting forward. Yep. He talked about a new civilization model for the world. He talked about a multipolar future order of the world, yes, where the sovereignty and the dignity of all nations was respected, large, yep, or small. He talked about development of all nations. He talked about not confrontation, but consultation, about diplomacy. Yep. Everything he said in that speech was right in your face, mm-hmm, to these globalists.
Yes.
I'd like your thoughts on that speech and the importance of that speech, because I thought it was historic. I thought it gave hope not only to me, but to billions of people in the non-West aligned world, that this was a future that was hopeful. Rick, your thoughts on Putin's speech and whether or not that was historic, whether or not it was hopeful, whether or not it was a direct challenge to Klaus Schwab and all of those unelected, they're not elites, those unelected, I think I want to call them
authoritarian thugs.
Worse than that.
What we're seeing, in my estimation, is a struggle between people with a globalist, internationalist goal, where the entire world is ruled by a one world government, and on the other side, people like Vladimir Putin, who are nationalists, who want to preserve the sovereignty of their nation states so that they can determine the destiny of their country, and so the people are entitled to self-determination. And that way, it is a struggle of freedom versus authoritarianism on a global scale. These concepts date back generations, hundreds, if not thousands of years. This idea of internationalism versus nationalism, it has its roots also in, communist and socialist ideologies. But as I say, I don't think the old labels apply anymore. So that speech was historic because it really does lay out what the struggle is really all about. It is internationalism or globalism versus nationalism. The globalists like Biden, like Trudeau, always make reference to, they always use this phrase, an international rules-based order. What do they mean by that? It means they get to make up a bunch of rules that all countries are supposed to abide by. It's like writing up a bunch of laws and saying, this is the criminal code internationally for all countries, and you have to abide by these things. I can see an advantage to that. The idea being that it will bring an end to world conflicts because you have one governing body, and it dictates to all the countries around the world what rules they're supposed to abide by, so that they don't have to be any more wars. And that's really what the League of Nations and then subsequently the United Nations, forming those organizations, was at least on the surface supposed to be about. But so often in politics, we see that what we're told ends up being actually the opposite of what it's supposed to be. It's never been about actually freeing nations or ensuring the sovereignty of nations. It's been quite the opposite, right? So I think they're sort of, with this international globalist view, enslaving nations and subsequently the people underneath as well. So that's what it is. It's globalism versus nationalism, but it isn't necessarily a fascistic nationalism like Nazism was under Hitler. It's just about preserving the sovereignty of individual nation states. That's what Russia is largely fighting for here, with the Ukraine conflict, because we've seen that NATO just continued to expand and expand and expand after promising they wouldn't after the fall of the Berlin Wall, saying it wouldn't expand 1 inch further, but NATO kept pushing and pushing and pushing, and now here we are on the doorstep of Russia with a NATO-controlled Ukraine, U.S.-controlled Ukraine, threatening Russia. It does pose an existential threat to the country. There is a lot of history still there to go along with that, so you fully understand why the Ukrainians feel the way they do. I think largely the Ukrainian people are caught in the middle again in an international conflict where the United States is trying to go head to head, toe to toe with Russia, and it's Ukraine that is paying the price. That's why I think the United States is willing to fight right to the last Ukrainian. But it's sick, it's twisted, it's demented. But at the same time, I do understand through history why Ukrainians feel the way they do about a lot of things too, because their country has been used as sort of a doorway to Russia for a long time and has been abused by many countries through history. They've suffered so much, and their perspective on this, of course, is nationalistic as well. Not necessarily even from Mr. Hunka during World War II. I don't think his views were necessarily formed just from from a German nationalistic, fascistic point of view, but certainly tempered and nuanced by his love of his country at the time as well. Because there again, World War II, you're Ukrainian, you're kind of caught between, the different factions, right? The Russians on this side, the Germans on that side. You're in the middle. Who do you end up with? You look at even a country like Italy. You had Italian soldiers who fought originally on the German side, and then through the course of the war, they ended up fighting on the Allied side. Things flipped. So war is never black and white. It's always shades of gray. That's reality anyway. It doesn't excuse anyone who's committed any kind of a war crime. That is for sure. But that is also why we need to look at each case, I think, for each person on an individual basis and decide or determine through actual evidence what someone may or may not have done before we start stringing them up and executing them. I mean, I see so many people just ready, in the case of Mr. Hunka, to kill him. And I ask you, would you, if Mr. Hunka was standing in front of you right now, knowing what you know, and I put a gun in your hand and I let you make the decision, would you shoot him in the head?
No, absolutely not.
No, I wouldn't either, Regis.
Yeah. You know, I agree with you about a national identity. I used to think that the United States of America had a national identity. We were the melting pot of the world. Canada was in the same situation.
I'll speak to that, but that's important. I'm going to come back to that.
Okay. I'll just give you my take on it.
Yeah.
I think in the United States, we really don't have a national identity. We talk about being the melting pot, but when you go back to the history of the United States, it's all been glorified. Christopher Columbus, the first Thanksgiving, the Pilgrims, John Winthrop, we are a city on the hill, God's favored nation. This has been really America's identity, an exceptional country. And I don't think that is really a national identity. I've been living in Russia now for almost 4 years, 3.5 going on 4 years, been coming here since 2016. I can tell you that Russia has a national identity. It goes back several thousand years. Mm-hmm. It's a culture. It's a history. It is not one of immigration. It's a massive landmass that contains 180 some different ethnic nationalities who have lived in peace for thousands, hundreds and hundreds of years, maybe 1,000 years. There are Muslims, there are Christians, there are Protestants. They all have been managing to live together. And I think the only thing that allows that to happen is this shared culture. Take it away. I want your opinion on that.
I think that you're kind of right on the money there. The United States was always described as their approach to immigration was a melting pot, which was to say that people were supposed to come to the United States and then assimilate into society with American values. Canada took a different approach. Canada was supposed to be and is a cultural mosaic where when people come to the country, they're encouraged to retain their cultural identity, retain their religion, all the culture that comes with them. And honestly, as a result, they also retain their politics. Justin Trudeau will tell you that diversity is our strength, and I disagree. I say diversity is our challenge in Canada. It's a challenge that Canadians have largely risen to and have embraced and have successfully dealt with largely, which is why, Regis, you having spent a considerable amount of time here, you know that the people here are tolerant, welcoming. We do get along, even though so many people come from so many backgrounds and so many different communities. But the mistake that Canada has made is that it has been, I think, maybe a little too tolerant, a little too eager to embrace diversity. And as a result, this small tile, this one single tile in the cultural mosaic that makes up Canada, the Ukrainian tile, has been allowed to exist within the mosaic with a little bit of contamination. Well, maybe a lot. Because when the Ukrainians came here, after World War II, among them some Nazis. And whether they were guilty of war crimes or not, they brought with them their fascist Nazi ideology. And because Canada encourages people to retain their culture, there really was no concerted effort made to purge that ideology from that community. Not to say that Canada has not addressed many issues regarding fascism and Nazism over the years. We continue to do that. When we see it bubble to the surface, people are appalled, and we do take action against that. And it's swift, and it's usually very, very effective. There was an incident about a year ago, I think, where some kids, as a joke, or they thought it was a joke. It was some sort of an online social media challenge. They marched around a soccer field doing Hitler salutes, and and they posted that on social media. That sparked an outcry, and of course, there was an immediate and swift reaction to that, and the kids were disciplined and taught about history so that they would understand why they shouldn't do that. It's not left to fester. But in the case of the Ukrainian community, it has been allowed to exist there. Hidden, largely hidden, because of Canada's policy or approach to immigration, where it's like, you just keep your culture. And in the Ukrainian case, it's been, I think, the ideology was allowed to persist because they're Ukrainian, not German. Other Canadians didn't really understand or recognize that there was a fascistic element to the belief systems that some of these folks had and retained, including, I think, Mr. Hunka, in my opinion. So this is why it's been there all through. That's the Canadian mistake. A little too tolerant, and we've allowed it to stay there as part of that single tile in the cultural mosaic, and there's just been this contamination. As a result, we now have a government that, largely that kind of ideology was not present in our society, not in a way that it was visible to anyone or even of concern to most people in any substantial way. But now we have a government that has embraced it because of this war in Ukraine. And even before that, honestly, this liberal regime, they've embraced that ideology through people like Chrystia Freeland, who managed to inject themselves into government, into positions of power, presenting themselves as neoliberals, presenting themselves as socialists who are going to give you everything under the sun for free in order to get elected, only to then sell the country out to this globalist agenda. Because it was there, because that contamination has been there, it's found its way into the halls of power, into Parliament, into the House of Commons, which is the House of the Common People, the House of the People. Captured, taken over by, honestly, a fascistic, global, communo-fascistic authoritarian regime, unknowing to the Canadian people. And this government has got to go. Justin Trudeau has got to step down. He must resign. Chrystia Freeland must resign. We cannot tolerate this. We cannot have them in power. That being said, we cannot also allow outside political forces to exploit this situation in a way that might plunge this country into a civil war. It does not need to go there. This global war, this third world war, which I believe is already underway, it does not need to go kinetic in that way here in this country. We can solve this problem without having people get shot. We absolutely can, because I still believe in our system, even though it has been captured and has been abused by this sick, twisted government that we have. The system is still there, and it has checks and balances in place. Our system is designed to eventually self-correct. The people will have an opportunity to do that in the next election, or maybe the one after, but certainly in the next election, which is not that far away. It's coming, and he will go. We have to give the people a chance. We can't let, though, Canada to be lost, because Canada does offer hope to the world. It always has since its creation in 1867. since the patriation of the Constitution in 1982, which gave us actual sovereignty over this country. That's why people from around the world want to come here. It is the land of hope. It offers so much to so many people. It offered true freedom, but it has been captured, taken away from us. People recognize it. More and more people are waking up to it, but we have to give the people a chance to fix it and not throw the entire country into the dustbin of history only to be replaced by something that, honestly, whatever it is that will come next, if we throw it away like this and allow this country to be plunged into some sort of a physical kinetic war of some kind, whatever replaces it will not be as good as what we have. We still have the system, and we have to use it. And I don't want kids to worry about whether they're going to get blown up or shot when they go to school because there's some sort of a bizarre, twisted civil war that has erupted in this country. It doesn't need to go there. Indeed, Regis, I will tell you that this country is closer to that than anyone realizes. And I can give you specific evidence of it if I need to, but we are very close to that. I so worry about it, and I know that that is not the path forward. That will only make things worse. If there is one thing that I've laid in bed night after night after night thinking about all of this and the Hunka incident and the history, and this is the conclusion I've come up with. History, everyone says you need to learn your history or you are doomed to repeat it. Sort of true. It is true. But what I'm also seeing is a lot of these historians who use that phrase, and a lot of politicians and a lot of governments and a lot of people with grudges and hatred in their flowing through their veins because of the history that they know. These people, yeah, they know their history and they use it because they're determined to repeat it. And we can't allow that to happen. So what we absolutely need to do is we have to let it go. If there's one lesson from history we need to learn, it's that at the end of it all, we have to let it go. We need to find forgiveness somehow. We can't seek vengeance. Justice, yes. Vengeance, no. We cannot let politicians, governments, globalists, nationalists, anybody to exploit this in a way that they will use it to seek power for themselves. We can't do that. Because even if they do, all that will happen is that more people will die, there will be more bloodshed, and that will guarantee at least another century of the same kind of conflicts that we're having now. You solve nothing with more bloodshed. You solve nothing with the civil war here. We're seeing this honestly happening right now with Israel and the Gaza Strip, Hamas, Hezbollah. These age-old, generations-old conflicts that never seem to end. And you know why it never ends? Because the history runs deep, and the people, the politicians, the people who seek power, they will not let it go. They use it. They don't learn from it. They use it because they're determined to keep repeating it until they win. But there's no way for the people to win in these scenarios. Everybody loses. The regular people, the everyday people pay the ultimate price. They die. We suffer. Not the elites, not the people at the top, not the people who pull the strings, not the people who send our sons and daughters off to war. They are not the ones who suffer. It is us. We cannot let them, any of them, on any side, continue to exploit a situation like this Hunka thing so that they can justify more aggression. And I see people trying to do it right now. Yay, I go further than that. It has the opposite effect as well. I'm seeing that actual Nazis, actual globalist, communo-fascistic authoritarians will be using it, have been using it as a shield to protect themselves. For instance, Justin Trudeau. He's going to flip this thing around. And you know what? He's looking at releasing more documents from the Duchesne Commission and maybe releasing the names of more Nazis. Well, he's the damn problem right there. Okay, Justin Trudeau's the problem, but what has he done? He's thrown the country under the bus. Now he's going to make himself out to be a hero because he's going to expose more Nazis because of this guy being found in Parliament. Oh, look, I found a problem. Look, I'm seeking justice. I'm the hero. I'm not a Nazi. Oh no. You see how it gets flipped around? And I've seen other people who have been exposed because of their white supremacist neo-Nazi ideology, charged with various crimes in that regard here in Canada, come out and say, you see, I'm not the Nazi. Justin Trudeau's the Nazi. The government's the Nazi. I'm falsely accused. No, you are a Nazi too. You are too. You're just using this as a cloak to protect yourself. You see how it gets so twisted and bizarre? It's politics. It's political theater, and they will spin it. This is dangerous territory to be in. It's simple to take something like this and spin up a narrative and portray it to the public in very black and white terms. That's effective politics. That's effective storytelling. But to get to the actual truth of something, there's always nuance. There are shades of gray. It's never black and white, anything you ever look at. If you're watching somebody who's portraying this issue in straight up black and white terms, these are all Nazis. This guy's a Nazi. The whole country's full of damn Nazis, right? That's just too simplistic and dangerous in itself, because those are also people who, when you deal in absolute terms like that, you're not getting the truth. You're getting a truth. You're getting some truth, but you're not getting the whole truth. And that's not really, that's not helpful, because it leads to, I believe in this case, it will lead to more conflict, more war, more bloodshed, an expansion of the war that we have right now. There's nothing productive that will come out of expanding the war. So I've been saying all along, calm down. Let's look at this and deal with the real issues here so that we make sure we get at the real issues. Yes, Canada does have a problem with a rising tide of fascism. I'm seeing it. It's a real problem, but it's not really there. That's the old stuff. This is old history. I see journalists dragging up all kinds of old stories from 50 years ago, 60, 70 years ago. Well, that's not today. It gets people angry. And they didn't do anything about it in 1952. Yeah, I know. That's history. I'm aware of that. That's a there's a problem. But we have a problem today. And that problem today with fascism, the rising tide of anti-Semitism and hatred and fascism, it's being cloaked by this, which also makes me wonder if in some weird twisted way this whole thing wasn't choreographed so that they could put this guy, inject him into the narrative to have the actual opposite effect of what people think that you're trying to get at. You're going to try and solve the problem, and in reality, you're just going to make it worse. This is done in politics a lot too. It's never that simple. A lot of this stuff is, well, it's upside down, Regis.
Rick, I started taking some notes on a number of things you were talking about. I really can't add to anything you've said. As an American, the same thing has happened in terms of the country being taken over. Mm-hmm. And I do believe there has been an agenda. It's been in place for a long, long time. And now I think we're seeing it all come to fruition on a global scale. What we're talking about has happened everywhere in the Western world for sure. Yep. In Japan, in South Korea, Australia, but not in the Far East, not in Asia, not in China, and certainly not in Russia. Yep. I wish that I had some hope that elections in the United States could change things. The last number of years proved that elections are fraudulent. They change nothing. we have a uniparty in the United States. The American people have not woken up to that yet. I don't know what it's going to take, but I fear the same thing you mentioned you feared in Canada. A civil war is brewing in the United States. There's people that hate each other. Yeah. Racism is systemic. The hatred of the other, the distrust of the other, the fear of the other. Corruption in the United States government, they don't call it corruption. Well, they call it lobbyists. They call it influence, but it's corruption. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that an election now can change that. I am very concerned that there could be, I don't know that it could go as far as a civil war, but a definite outbreak in violence that could arouse, depending on what happens in the run up to the next election, whether Trump loses or whether he's prohibited from running. He got some 75, 80 million votes, people who are passionate about him and what he supposedly stands for. Mm-hmm. I'm not a proponent of Trump at all. I'm just pointing out that I think all of the factors are there to enable an explosion in the United States that will be ugly. This has been a little bit breathtaking for me, Rick. I really appreciate your analysis, and I have to say, there's nothing that I could add. The only thing that I could say is I have to agree. What I appreciated was how you described the difference between the United States and Canada. Canada being a mosaic, the United States being a melting pot. Regardless, both of our countries have been taken over by these globalists that you talked about. Yeah. I want to give you the last word, and I want to go back to Putin's speech. Putin, Russia, and China are now joined at the hip. It was President Xi who first coined the term a civilizational model, respecting civilizations, sovereignty, history, culture. Putin has been using different language, multipolar, sovereignty, all nations are equal, diplomacy rather than conflict. Do you see the combined, not forces, because I don't mean military, but the combined efforts of Russia and China in other countries in the BRICS as an opposing, an opposite force to Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum to dominate the world?
Absolutely. That's exactly what that's what we're seeing. We're seeing a face-off between the globalists and the nationalists. Even here in Canada, it's strange to kind of, it has been strange to see this unfold, but we even have a new convoy, this sort of thing that has taken shape here. And to me, this represents real serious pushback against the government. They don't really seem to have the resources to mount any kind of an actual meaningful or substantial coercive pushback against the government, but there were concerns about it. It was revealed that this convoy had plans to get violent, using arms, force against the Canadian government, but it was exposed. As a result, they dialed everything back, but they have been sitting now for almost a week outside of Ottawa in a field, and they're setting up multiple encampments now around the nation's capital. They haven't gone away, even after having their violent plans exposed. They're now presenting themselves as peaceful protesters, and they're marching into the area of Parliament Hill on a daily basis and staging small protests trying to get more people to come down to support them. As small as it appears to be, and it may be bigger than people realize, but it's in spite of the fact that it's small, it represents that kind of pushback that Regis is actually talking about, manifesting itself within a country through a grassroots movement. These protesters view Vladimir Putin as someone who shares their views. These protesters are, in a way, nationalistic. I don't think their political ideology is completely formed. They can't tell you exactly what they want or what things would look like if they were successful in their pushback against our government. But they see Putin as their hero in many ways here in Canada because of the stance he has taken on this globalism issue, promoting nationalism, national sovereignty versus this global governance. That's what Canadians really do want. They want control over their own country and, by extension, control over their own destiny. They want to make the laws. They want to have their rights and preserved as individuals. That's what people want. That's what Vladimir Putin, in the eyes of many people here fighting for what they would characterize as freedom, that's what they think Vladimir Putin is fighting for as well. And it's simply because it comes down to their struggle against globalism as well. It's globalism that, in their eyes, has led to things that we've experienced during the pandemic, the lockdowns, mask mandates, forced vaccinations, things that in the before times here in Canada and the United States would have been unthinkable. There's no way in the Canada that I knew before, no way that anyone living here would have been forced to take a vaccination. But that all changed with Justin Trudeau and the Liberal regime. Strangely, it's Vladimir Putin who presents himself today as an ally to those in Canada who seek individual liberty, truth, justice, and freedom. It's difficult to know how to fight back against that because if you, living in Canada, take a position in a physical way of any kind or support Putin or Russia, then I guess you could be characterized as someone who is traitorous, treasonous even, depending on how far you go with it. On the other hand, it's the government that's clearly the enemy. So you need to find a path forward, some way to have this corrected. And as I said, I think we just need to give it a little bit more time. I think we're close, but the system has to be given a chance to self-correct. We can't resort to violence. I can't support what these people who are, I would call them soft revolutionaries. I can't support what they're doing because that is actually an act of treason against my own country. I would never support that. But at the same time, I know the government has to go. We can overthrow the government at the ballot box. We have to. The alternative is too horrific to even imagine, to think about. So that's where I'm at on that, Regis, and I hope that helps you.